There are life experiences that come along with growing up, depending on your family and where you grew up. In my part of the world, the heart of the Midwest, there was a rite of passage that seemed so commonplace we never questioned it. It was the air raid siren going off in the middle of the night and your dad coming into your room and saying, "We've got to go out into the basement, there's a tornado warning." That was part of my life, and I didn't think twice about it. It happened every year, sometimes not in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of the day. But we became accustomed to it because that was what happened where we live. When I was elected to Congress and then to the Senate, I spent my time visiting locations where tornadoes had struck all over my state. So I've seen my fair share of tornado damage in the Midwest. But I'll have to tell you what I saw on Saturday was extraordinary. I went to Southern Illinois to two towns, Harrisburg and Ridgeway. They were hit the previous Wednesday by what is known as a Stage 4 tornado. Stage 4 tornado is a tornado with winds up to 175 miles per hour. That is a tornado so violent that the winds, from what I'm told, were even greater than Hurricane Katrina. And it hit this tiny little town in Southern Illinois, and I looked at the devastation afterwards. I had never seen this kind of tornado and this kind of damage in my life. I'm told it happened one time before in the history of our state. I also have to tell you that the response of the people there was what makes me proud to be from that state and to be part of this great nation. From the very minute that this devastation took place, people started coming toward the devastation to try to help. There were some amazing stories. The volunteers that helped this lady out of the debris of her home. At the nearby coal mine, they have a rescue team that is sent in when there's danger of a mine disaster. They've got hard hats and breathing equipment and all the right extrication devices and tools. They came rushing to the scene, coal dust all over their faces, digging right into the wreckage, pulling people out. That story was repeated over and over and over again. The heroism and volunteerism didn't end that day. It continued all through the time that I was there and even to this day. Special kudos to the American Red Cross, always first on the scene, always performing a valuable and important job, as they did in Southern Illinois. I went over to Ridgeway, which is a town 24 miles away, and for some reason this god-awful tornado skipped from Harrisburg to Ridgeway and did little damage in between. But it lit down again in Ridgeway and ripped through that town. About 400 homes were damaged in Harrisburg, roughly, and over 100 in Ridgeway. Some of the scenes that I saw there were amazing. There's a Catholic church there that was 100 years old. It was the sturdiest structure in town by far. Had people been given enough notice, this happened early in the morning, about 5 a.m., they might have said the safest place to go is the church. Well, the church is gone. There are two things left. There's a doorway for the church and the altar. Everything else has been obliterated. There have been a lot of pictures taken by people of that altar still standing in the rubble. An inspiration to many, perhaps a message that there will be certain things spared even in the worst disasters. In that town, too, the fire department met with the mayor and all the volunteers. And the one thing about being a volunteer after a disaster in Illinois, I guarantee you, you won't lose weight. Everybody brought in the food. Just all kinds of food from every direction, pies and cakes and chili and hot dogs. A fellow came by there, had his barbecue operation set up. It was a huge operation, and he was just cooking like crazy. But it was an indication that everybody wanted to be pitching in to help. So I want to thank all those engaged in the rescue and cleanup work at every level. The Illinois Emergency Management Agency under Governor Pat Quinn, the governor's been down there twice. John Munkin, who was the director of that agency, accompanied me on this trip. Local units of government, the sheriff's office, the local disaster agency people, all the volunteers, the Red Cross, a group called Operation Blessing, which showed up. I'd never heard of them before. I'll bet they've been around, though, because they knew just what to do. They came in there and they said, every religious group or other volunteer group that wants to come and help, come check with us. We'll send you to a place where you might be needed. And as I walked through the wreckage, there were volunteers of every age, from little kids to elderly folks with rakes in their hands, picking up trash and getting it off to the side and trying to put people's lives back together again. The scores of volunteers just made me proud to represent that great state and the people living in it. There are several things that we need to talk about as a result of that disaster that cannot go unsaid. I know it's not considered politically correct now to talk about the state of climate in America, but I'm going to. Because you see, as I stand here today, Mr. President, we have had 274 tornadoes already recorded in America this year. 274. At this time last year, 50. And this tornado that hit my home state, and I might say the tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri last year, were extraordinary events when it came to tornadoes. The weather patterns are changing. The weather events are more frequent and more severe. That is a fact. Are we ready? Are we prepared for it? Are we doing everything we can? And the simple and honest answer is no. First, we need to acknowledge the obvious, and I know I'm walking on dangerous ground here, but the climate is changing. To go from a situation last year where a year ago we had the worst recorded blizzard in the history of Chicago, followed 4 months later by the most rainfall ever recorded in 1 hour, to this situation with 274 tornadoes so far this year, and literally scores of people killed, 6 in Harrisburg, many in Kentucky and Tennessee and other places. It's an indication that weather is changing, the severity is changing, and we need to be honest about it. We've got to get beyond the political argument into the world of reality. There are things that we are doing, I sincerely believe, that are affecting the world that we live in, affecting the melting of the glaciers, affecting the disappearance of species, affecting the change of weather patterns all around. And as long as we continue to take the politically convenient route of ignoring that, then future generations can point a finger of blame at us for failing to acknowledge the obvious when we might have had a chance to make some difference in future lives. That's a fact. Secondly, I held a hearing, Mr. President, and I brought in not government experts, I brought in experts from the private sector. Do you know who knows more about weather events and damage than anyone in America? The insurance industry. And I brought them in, property and casualty insurance companies, and asked them the same question. Is weather changing? They said it's obvious. Why do you think some companies are taking their business out of certain places in America? You cannot set up a reserve for the possibility of damage that is on the horizon. We're trying to cover ourselves. We're profit-making people. And if we can't see a way to set up a reserve for potential weather disasters, we start backing off of coverage. It's been done. Major insurance companies have walked away from places like Florida because of hurricanes and because of violent storms. And then I asked them the question about whether or not the United States government was adequately prepared to shoulder the burden that comes with these disasters. And the burden does come. Particularly for those uninsured, we end up, as a government, helping them. I don't begrudge people that. I'm going to ask for help from my state. I'm sure you'd do the same. Every senator would. But here is the bottom line. When the Bowles-Simpson Commission sat down to try to determine how much we should budget each year for disasters, they came up with what these people in the private sector said was a totally unreasonable formula. It basically averaged 10 years and put an additional cost of living adjustment on it. They said that isn't the future. The future is a geometric progression in cost. As property becomes more expensive, as the storms become more violent, we're not thinking about this, and we're not thinking about what we should do to deal with it. We also need to think about ways to warn people about these disasters before they strike. We live in a new world. In the old world we lived in, going back how far I can't say, maybe a century, you'd turn on a siren outside. Well, that still is of some value. It warns people, and they respond to it. But in this day and age, there has to be a better way. Let me suggest a few. In some counties in my state, the disaster agency has on record all of the telephone numbers of all of the residents. If something's coming, your phone's going to ring too. Not just the siren outside that maybe you don't hear because you're sleeping or because the television's too loud, but the telephone's going to ring too. That is something that we need to make standard across this country. so there is a way to reach everyone. I don't know this because, I'm a liberal arts lawyer. What do I know about these things? But it seems to me that we ought to be able to deal with some mechanism in a cell phone that says that you will receive a notice when there is a warning going out of something disastrous on the way. I think that that ought to be doable, and I'm working with people in FEMA and others to talk about that possibility.